that was going to deliver today and looking at 2021 and beyond, I can't help but remember all the challenges that we faced in 2020 and maybe more importantly, how did we respond to these challenges? We can't be defined by the crisis that we go through, but by how we respond to these crises and move forward. Uh, there's a pretty good quote from an unknown author that I'd like to share that I think really hits the mark. And it says, sometimes we're tested not to show our weakness, but to discover our strengths. And I think that is especially true in 2020 after all that we've been through. That certainly applies to North Carolina agriculture, to the farming community, and North Carolina's farmers. COVID has challenged us all, but in the face of adversity, North Carolina agriculture and farmers have stood tall. They kept working, and they've continued to provide the food and fiber and fuel for all of us. I've never been more proud of our industry or our farmers. You all are commended for stepping up to the challenges and finding workable answers. Throughout the pandemic, we worked with our state's public health partners to make sure agriculture concerns were heard and addressed. And when I say we, that means the North Carolina Farm Bureau, our commodity leaders, NC State, Extension, everybody worked together to make sure that we weren't left behind. We're continuing to work on vaccination timetables and when they are rolled out, and we are in regular communication with state health officials advocating for priority status for agricultural workers. We continue to advocate for the need to protect these essential frontline workers, and I think President Harding would agree with me. There has been no issue that we have worked harder or spent more time on than making sure that our workers are safe. And we will continue to do that even as we work through the legislative session. Having a healthy workforce is absolutely essential to agriculture and our food supply. We all know that vaccine supplies are limited, but I'm hopeful we'll see production increase and catch up with demand in the near future. And I can assure you that all the partners will continue to work on this issue. But until this vaccine is available to everyone, we all need to remain vigilant, wearing masks, participating in social distancing, and washing our hands. And this pandemic we're going to move past it at some point, and we're going to emerge stronger than ever. And I think some of the things that we learned during the pandemic will help us stronger in the future. I personally have had my second shot and am now into the immunity stage. And I really look forward to getting back out, traveling, seeing people across North Carolina, and returning to some sense of normalcy. And I think we all need to be optimistic that that's going to happen in the near future. And I think the signs are out there that it's going to happen. With all the challenges that we have faced, they're in the past. And the past is a place to learn from, not a place to live. So it's time to move forward. I'm proud to say that agriculture and agribusiness continue to represent the state's number one industry at $92.7 billion. We continue to employ about a fifth of the workforce. And if you look at some of the large cities in North Carolina, I think that's sometimes that's hard for people to imagine. But you don't have to get far outside the cities to see the rural landscape of North Carolina and the infrastructure and the agribusiness that goes on in North Carolina, and we are proud to be a part of that. I believe we're on the cusp of becoming a $100 billion industry in terms of economic impact. And thanks to the continued investment in agricultural research, coupled with the innovation in food production and manufacturing, I'm going to talk about some of these highlights. So just kind of hold on a minute and let me talk about a few other issues that I've heard out there. On the campaign trail, I've heard a lot of untrue things about agriculture and the farmers in North Carolina. And to tell you the truth, it's a tired narrative created by people that have never actually farmed or made a living from farming. But these well-fed activists are well-funded, and they're going to continue to attack us like we're old McDonald. Old McDonald was gone basically before the book was written. And the truth of the matter is, one farmer feeds over 150 people today. So it's a much different story than what's being portrayed. And all of us have got to step up to the plate to educate. The general public still does not understand where the food supply comes from and how technology plays a role in the production of their food supply. We look ahead. The United Nations says we're still going to have 75 to 100% more food to feed the world's population, and we need to have North Carolina farmers and agribusiness positioned to be able to take advantage of that. There are buzzwords out there in the public that I heard over and over again during the campaign, and one of them was resiliency. Another one was climate change, and another one was global warming. And as I look back and think about it, resiliency is something that we've been working on in North Carolina for a long time. And resiliency basically is planning. With all the disasters North Carolina has had in the past, we've worked very hard, not only in agriculture, but the whole state to be able to respond to these emergencies and prevent the damage as much as we possibly can. But there's not a lot you can do when 3 feet of water falls out of the sky and all the crops are covered up with water. All the planting in the world can't prevent that, and we try to deal with it as best we can. Climate change, that's the weather. We are the most weather-dependent industry that there is anywhere, and agricultural research has helped us prepare for changes in the weather, and we're going to have to continue to do that, and research will be the key. And global warming, that's something that you hear not only here in North Carolina, but nationally. And I tend to look to the science, and what the science says is that agriculture is actually a positive when it comes to the effects of global warming. We actually plant the green crops, we plant the trees that sequester carbon. We're open space that helps with cooling. So I'm proud of the effort that we have put forth in agriculture as far as these climate changes. And we're going to do our part to make sure that things are as good as they possibly can be, because we're weather dependent, and we're going to make sure that we do that. Everything that I see tells me that the viability and relevance of agriculture and agribusiness is more important than ever. What we do is a necessity. This is not a job that everybody can do or wants to do. So we've got less than 2% of the population feeding not only North Carolina, the nation, and the world. And, it's time that people realize that and revere a farmer. The 3 meals a day that people eat, they need to think about a farmer every time they do that and be thankful that there are people out there willing to do this. We've got to be in a position to meet worldwide food needs, and I think North Carolina is well positioned to do that. We've seen investment in agricultural infrastructure that's important not only for today, but for generations. And we've worked with legislative leaders to talk about the returns that come with agricultural research. And what that research has shown is that every dollar invested in agricultural research returns $19 on investment. I think any investor anywhere would love to have a part of that. So we're going to continue to push to make sure that we get what we need for research in agriculture and for infrastructure. As I look to the future, I think there are some promising signs out there. Being a farmer, I'm an optimist. The glass is always half full of water, not half empty, but For me, it's even more than that. I always see that half full growing to a full glass of water, and I think that's a job that is incumbent on all of us to do for agriculture. I do see young people returning to their agricultural roots. And the good thing is when they come back to the farm now, they're armed with technology and advances and an education that will help make agriculture even more successful in the future. I see consumers who are interested in supporting local farmers. We have a big local food economy in North Carolina. I can only see that grow. I see resources, innovation, and training come from our agricultural universities. And in North Carolina, our land grant universities, North Carolina State and North Carolina A&T State University, are linked like this with the agricultural community. And that makes us strong, and it makes for a very, very bright future. We do see expanding opportunities out there. One thing that happened in the pandemic is we saw a glaring need for more slaughter capacity, especially for local foods in North Carolina. And it got to the point that farmers were telling me that, you know, I've got a cow or a pig that I want to take to processing, and it's an 8-month wait. Well, that's not sustainable, and we know it. We were able to go to the legislature and get $20 million in CARES Act money, and we want to expand meat and seafood processing capabilities in the state of North Carolina. I can tell you we had a short time frame to do it. We were successful, and it's going to go to expand and upgrade small processing facilities and cut that wait time down on taking this protein directly from the farm to the consumer. When I came into office, we had maybe 5 meat handlers licensed with the Meat and Poultry Inspection Service. Today, we've got about 1,500 of these people licensed. That tells me there is a growing demand for this protein. We think that this grant money will help facilitate that. We're seeing commodity prices increase out there, and I know that's welcome to the farmers, and it's kind of been almost across the board. And the good news is when you see increases in most commodity prices, it means that there can be diversity at the farm level. And not everybody is trying to plant one commodity that is profitable. And what that normally means is you're going to have overproduction, and that profitable commodity becomes unprofitable. So commodity prices going up is a good thing. And international trade, which has been one of the backbones of North Carolina agriculture, is beginning to show great promise again. About 95% of the world's population lives outside of the United States. So we know that international trade is going to be a key to the success of our future. And just to give you an example, pork exports to China were up 20% last year. And quite frankly, if we had more freezer space in North Carolina, it could have gone up more. Poultry exports were also up 20% as we resumed trade with China. And poultry alone in 2018, we went from almost nothing being exported to China in the poultry world to over $100 million in 2020. We know that tobacco growers have been particularly challenged with the lack of contracts and lower pricing, and we're seeing that turn around. China coming back into the tobacco markets has been a very big plus in the arm, as we knew it would be. But there's also been some uptick in contracting volumes from our leaf dealers and our domestics. In fact, I talked to one leaf dealer on the way in this morning and was told that their volumes would be up 25%. That is very, very welcome news, and maybe we can start to stabilize our tobacco industry in North Carolina. In the past 10 years, exports of prepared foods have risen from $45 million to over $400 million last year. And remember, with the pandemic going on, We haven't been able to access these foreign markets like we would like to. So I think that is a wonderful, wonderful sign. Beer and wine and spirits were up 50% last year as far as exports. We've even started exporting sweet potatoes to the Middle East, and it began in earnest last year. And the department and the North Carolina Sweet Potato Commission have begun a joint marketing venture to research and expand sales in the region and make this our next growth market in sweet potatoes. I look forward to our international trade section in the department being able to get out all over the world again in person to help sell these products. But they've learned too during the pandemic about what they can do virtually, and we still are maintaining our office in China and our personnel there. So maybe we took in North Carolina a bigger hit during the trade wars, so-called trade wars, because we had done so much business with China, but now I think that it's going to once again pay a dividend, and we'll start to mine that market again. Later this month, we're having a virtual trade show with Argentina, which before would never have happened. Secondary markets like Argentina were previously outside of the budget that we have in the department. But now with everything we're doing virtually, it's going to make them more accessible to North Carolina agriculture. And to give an example, a normal trade show, we maybe get 5 companies involved. On this Argentinian show, we've got 20 companies who will participate virtually in this show. So that is a good sign and one that we'll continue to work on. There's something else that I think is going to really make a difference for us in North Carolina agriculture. I want to mention that I'll be serving as co-chair with Secretary of State Elaine Marshall on the North Carolina Coalition for Global Competitiveness. And this is a partnership of private and public sector leaders. And we'll be focusing on global engagement, and we want to bring a decidedly agricultural flavor to this organization so that these leaders that maybe are not familiar with what we do in trade and agriculture will come very familiar with it and help us to access markets all around the world. So I'm really excited about that. And we will do what we can do to bring this part of the education to business leaders across North Carolina. There are a lot of changes going on. This will be my 4th administration change since becoming Commissioner of Agriculture, and it's always lag time and a time to try to be able to develop friendships, partnerships with new people, and we're trying to do this right now. And we also know that as we approach 2022, we'll be talking about a new farm bill and what the priorities of this farm bill are going to be. And I certainly hope that we all are engaged in the needs of agriculture in this farm bill. And I mean, we kind of have an inclination that there's going to be a lot of emphasis on climate change in this next farm bill. But the trick to this is there's got to be a balance between the environmental concerns and the production of our food supply. And that balance is what we'll be working towards. We do know that Tom Vilsack is going to be the new USDA secretary. He's a very experienced secretary, one that I know, and I know Farm Bureau has had a lot of dealings with, so we'll be working with him. And the good news so far is Jewel Bronall, the Commissioner of Agriculture in Virginia, has been nominated for Deputy Secretary at USDA. We have a very, very close relationship with her, working back and forth over the years. So we know that that relationship will be very, very good. And I certainly hope that we see the Secretary select other state leaders to be undersecretaries in the Department of Ag. And there are many qualified commissioners, directors, and secretaries across the country. that would do wonderfully well serving as undersecretaries. So we will be watching that closely and start building the relationships. Recently, something happened in North Carolina that we've been waiting for to see happen. Big Idea Ventures, a global leader in early stage alternative protein investing, announced the launch of the Generation Food Rural Partners Fund. And the good news is NC State will be the inaugural collaborator. We're very proud that this company went all over the United States researching where the best place for them to start their venture fund investments would be, and they chose North Carolina. And they chose North Carolina, I think, for a reason. We have been very active in North Carolina and proactive in infrastructure that we know will provide success for the future. And NC State's Plant Science Initiative and the Food Innovation Lab in Kannapolis are just two examples. And there are a lot of people that work very hard to get the Food Innovation Lab started. And I think this is just the beginning of the success that will bring to us in food manufacturing. NC State University and the department did a joint study on food manufacturing several years ago. And what it showed is if we were able to bring a lot of food manufacturing into North Carolina, it would result in about $10 billion in economic impact to the state. And it would employ about 38,000 people. So we think NC Field will be the catalyst for this to happen, and we can't wait to see the food manufacturing that comes to North Carolina as a result of this. Investments such as Generation Food Rural Partners will help grow the food manufacturing, and they will provide venture capital to companies, especially startup companies that have the big ideas that they're looking for, and we will be the recipient of that. I mentioned the North Carolina Food Innovation Lab, but there are two other things that have been really pushing the future of North Carolina. The Plant Science Initiative at NC State University over time will give us access to the brightest minds in the world when it comes to agriculture. So that will give us quickly give us a competitive advantage, I believe, in agriculture, and it's something that we all have supported and worked for, and that will come to fruition shortly. The thing that the department has done, looking to the future, is to build the Agricultural Science Center in Raleigh. It is a sight to see. It's the equivalent of 5 acres of lab space and office space, and it replaces labs that were over 40 years old, aging, almost impossible to maintain, and in some cases not applicable to the newest technology that we need for the future in the industries that we have in North Carolina. And this lab, if you eat, if you drive a vehicle, if you're in agriculture, if you have anything to do with weights and measures, all of these things are going to be combined in this lab, and the vet end of the lab will move us to the forefront in the country as to what we can do with testing. And with this huge animal agricultural industry that we have in North Carolina, it was a necessity that we be able to get this lab up and running. And I'm proud to say the building is built. We're beginning the move-in process, and being a farmer, I thought move-in meant go get a box truck and a pickup truck and we'll pick it up and we'll throw it in and we'll be there. But this scientific equipment that we have has got to be handled delicately. It's got to be taken down in just the right manner. It's got to be set up, recalibrated. And so we've got a lot to do to move in. The good news is we hope to be moved in by sometime the first part of June and operational maybe the middle of June. And once the pandemic is behind us, we will have a big open house and show this lab off. It's something that we are very proud of. There's nothing else like it in the country. And so we're going to move North Carolina into the future with this lab. I talked about environmental issues that we're facing in agriculture. And there are things that we can do and will do in North Carolina to make sure that we are doing what we need to do. We, as farmers, always have environmental issues on our mind. We've got to have good soil, clean water, and clean air to be able to produce crops. And this is to the benefit of the rest of the society. And I think back there was a bumper sticker several years ago, I think that was put out by the Farm Credit System. And what it said was farmers, the first environmentalists. And I think that's true. And I can add to it, I think we will be the last environmentalists because the food supply will be a necessity to everybody for as long as there are people. So everything between the first and the last will be there to do and do our part. And one of the things that we do in North Carolina is, of course, we grow crops, but we also have a huge forest industry in North Carolina. In fact, that accounts for about $34 billion of our $92 billion agricultural economy. So about a third of what we do in agriculture in North Carolina is forestry. We all know that trees are renewable. We know that they sequester carbon. They're open space that helps cool. They're a place that filters water. So having an eye on the forestry sector of agriculture in North Carolina is something we all need to do. We have a forest development program that has been our flagship tree planting program since 1977. It's managed by the North Carolina Forest Service as a cost share assistance program. And used to be a partnership between the forestry industry, the North Carolina Forest Service, and there was some money that used to be put in by the state of North Carolina. That hasn't been true in quite some time, and we hope we can move to get state money put back into the forest development program. And it is a personal goal of mine to plant millions and millions and millions of trees. To give an example, what we've done so far with the forest development program, in the fiscal year 2018-19, we planted 10.48 million tree seedlings or 17,000 acres of trees in North Carolina. In 2019 and 20, 12.98 million tree seedlings or 21,000 acres were planted. This is a great amount of land that has been planted in trees, but we need to do more. We think that we can obtain some funds to be able to plant more trees. And we think about all the things that our forest industry can do to us. We know that the program is underfunded by about $2 million annually. So we know that every year when we put applications out, there's $2 million worth of applications that we can't fund. They need to be funded. We're just meeting a fraction of the need for forest improvement and tree planting. And we want to be in a situation that every time we harvest a tree, that we replant a tree. And that's part of it. But the other part is with the development that North Carolina is going through, we are seeing trees being removed daily. So we need to be replenishing this tree removal also, and we believe that this program will be able to do that. The one thing that I want to tell people before I get to the conclusion of my speech, we're going to have us a state fair this year. A year without a state fair is almost undurable. So we are working very hard to make this the best state fair that anybody has ever seen. And with your help, it will be the biggest state fair that we've ever seen. So what I'm encouraging you to do is to go out and get your vaccinations as soon as they are available to you so that we can have a safe state fair and a record attendance at the state fair. Uh, I have done my 2 shots and I'm doing fine with it. I think I agree with what I heard a doctor say on television. He said the worst vaccine that there will ever be is the one you don't take. I think we all have a duty to take this vaccination to get the United States back in a position of normalcy. And it's almost like a war duty. So I encourage everybody to take the vaccine and let's have a very big state fair. I have covered a lot of ground today in my remarks, but I am really, really excited about the future of agriculture. We're going to make sure we have the natural resources and infrastructure in place for continued success for both agriculture and agribusiness in North Carolina. We all know that the future won't be easy. We in agriculture not only deal with policy, but we deal with the weather. And over the past 5 years, the weather has been an awful ally for us. So we hope that changes and we'll be able to move forward. Agricultural production is essential to the well-being of the nation. And if we don't work, people don't eat. So we're going to work hard and make sure that we continue all that we've done. We've been tested, we've bent, but we haven't broken. We're standing tall, and I think this will be the year that we turn the corner. Our communities in this state are stronger because of our dedicated farmers and agribusiness owners. We're better for the many contributions. Our nation is strengthened by your commitment to be leaders in your industries, and the world is a better place because you produce the products to feed others. I want to thank our many partners in agriculture, including the North Carolina Farm Bureau, the commodity groups, our ag universities, but I also want to thank my staff at the North Carolina Department of Agriculture for the work that they do every day. It is amazing to see them do what they've done. They have adapted to the pandemic. They've changed their work schedules, but they've been dedicated the whole time. They've continued to do the job. I couldn't have it any better than the people that work in the Department of Agriculture. So from the bottom of my heart, I thank you. Together, we're going to be prepared to build a strong, solid future for agriculture, and that's what we do every day. And I thank you for your attentiveness and being involved in this virtual State of Agriculture address. But we've got some more. I want to call on Dr. Blake Brown to give us an economic update on agriculture. Dr. Brown is a Hugh C. Kiger Professor of Agriculture and Resource Economics at North Carolina State University. He also served as an assignment as a senior economist for the Council of Economic Advisors in the Executive Office of the President of the United States, and he focused on agricultural policy. I know many of us have known Blake for many years, dating back to the work that he did on the tobacco buyout program. And I look forward to hearing what he has to say today. And Blake, I've tried to kind of paint a rosy picture, so don't bust my balloon now.
I'm not going to bust any bubbles today, Commissioner, and I'm like you. I am looking forward to having a state fair, a farm show, to doing meetings out in the state. I can tell you, Zoom is a wonderful tool, and we're glad for this virtual technology, but man, am I not looking forward to getting to actually see some folks and shake some hands and be out in the state. Well, it's good to be with y'all this morning. You'll just see my background here is our Executive Farm Management Program. So I'll just put a little plug in there, take a look at it. We'll have a full one, we hope, in 2022. We had to do a virtual version of that this year. But I'm going to talk to you this morning about sort of the outlook for 2021. Let me share my screen with you here and get started. and we'll look at what this upcoming year looks like. And it is a pretty good outlook, I think. I believe that we're going to see a pretty good year ahead for 2021. There's just a lot of stuff going on, and a lot of it has to do with policy changes because of the changes in administration. If you look at the USDA's latest forecast for 2021 farm income, it is down slightly. But if you look at the end of that, the reason that it's down is because direct farm payments from government, in other words, farm program payments, are expected to be down. But if you look at receipts from animal products, receipts from crops, those are both expected to be up. So we'll see a little bit of a return to a more normal like year. Here in North Carolina, you know, it's been kind of a rough few years. This is net cash farm income from North Carolina, and we don't have the 2020 numbers yet. My guess is 2020 wasn't a very good year for us here in North Carolina. You know, our hog and poultry industry was hit really hard by COVID. The tobacco was at the lowest level in over 100 years. So my guess is here in North Carolina, despite lower U.S. farm payments, we're probably going to see our income go up in 2021 because of the improvements that we're going to see in the animal and poultry industry, and because of the improvement that the commissioner mentioned with our tobacco pounds. Let's talk just briefly about trade. You know, when we look at who our trade partners are, we always think about China, and they are huge. But you know, we have some other big trade partners too. If you look in particular at our neighbors to the north, Canada, and our neighbor to the south, Mexico, if you add them together, they're bigger trade partners than either the EU or China. So we want to remember them. And also the EU continues to be a very important partner, and I'll say a little bit more about that. One of the things when we talk so much about all the policy issues and things going on, we forget about some of the basic things. The exchange rate has a big effect on trade. And one of the things that we saw during 2020 was a weakening of the US dollar, and that's good for US exports. If you look at this graph, it shows that Europeans can now buy more product for €1 out of the US than they could a year ago. And that means that they're going to, that US products have decreased in price just by virtue of the weakening of the US dollar. And that's true not only of the US dollar relative to the euro, but other major currencies in the world as well. So the exchange rate situation should help our ag exports as well. If you look at what we exported out of the US, and that's a little different for North Carolina, but if you look at the US, soybeans are by far the largest product that are exported. And you see that big increase up, that's basically because of China. If you look at some of the other products, corn shows a similar pattern. Pork products, while much smaller, is showing a very similar pattern. And of course, that's very important to North Carolina. If you look, for example, at soybean exports, you'll see that China makes up a large share of that. And we went down with our exports to China in 2018 with the trade war. But since 2018, despite the trade dispute, those exports have gone up very substantially. Part of the reason they went down wasn't just the trade war, it was African swine fever. That's perhaps had a bigger impact on feedstuffs and pork imports, our exports to China, than COVID or the trade dispute or anything else. And you'll see for 2020 that those soybean exports were up substantially to China. And if you look at pork exports to China, and this is actually the monthly value of imports of pork by China from top source countries. And if you look at that orange line there, that's the US. Look at how that thing went down to almost zero in 2018. That was the trade dispute. And then it just started skyrocketing. That's the impact of African swine fever. China lost about 40% of their swine herd. They consume a huge amount of pork in China. And so despite the trade dispute, they needed pork. And so they started really escalating imports of pork from the US, which was really good for North Carolina in particular. Well, what about China? You know, the thing that I noted when I was in Washington, and it continues on, is that we're seeing more alarms raised by both sides of the aisle in terms of China as a national security threat. China's a national security threat number one. That was a headline in an op-ed on the Wall Street Journal in December. It was by John Ratcliffe, who is a former director of national intelligence. And then if I saw this headline in Foreign Policy this month, just last week, that Biden's National Security Council sharpens the focus on China. I think what you'll see is that the tactics will change in terms of dealing with China. The rhetoric will change in terms of dealing with China, but the policy and the approach will be fairly similar. This is going to strain our relations going forward. And while there still will continue to be very strong export opportunities for agriculture, it will be clouded by this national security issue. If you look, though, at ag policy, something that is really, really important is how China has responded to African swine fever. I mentioned that African swine fever wiped out about 40% of their swine herd. And so there was a lot of wondering in the world, what will they do? Most of this was from their smallholders, although it did hit their commercial industry very high. Those smallholders of backyard hogs will have a very difficult time coming back. So what's China going to do? Are they going to import more pork into the future, or are they going to try to rebuild that pork industry? Well, all the evidence right now seems to be that they are trying very hard to rebuild their pork sector. This was an article from Pig Progress, a global publication on hogs back in December. It says, China's wonder, a rapid recovery of the pig sector. China's pork industry is like a phoenix rising from the ashes. So they are working very hard to rebuild their hog industry. This photo is an interesting one, huh? You almost have to wonder if it's a real photo. But this is of a 12-story brand new pig farm that they built in the mountains. It looks like you put it on top of one of the mountains up from where I'm from in the Blue Ridge Mountains. But this is a very high-tech facility, and it just is an indication of how they're trying to rebuild that pork industry. Pork consumption in China, they consume about 50% of the world's pork. So it's really a national policy issue. And when their pork prices started to escalate due to African swine fever in the latter part of 2018, they got really concerned because they want to keep their people happy, and having pork to eat is very important. So I think as we go into the future, they're going to try to build their hog industry. So yes, right now we have very strong export opportunities with China with regard to pork and poultry. I think into the future, that's going to swing back a little bit to feedstuffs because they certainly can't grow enough soybeans and corn in China to feed this industry. Well, we talk a lot about China, but we need to look at the rest of Southeast Asia as well. African swine fever has destroyed a lot of the smallholder, backyard hog production in all of Southeast Asia. It has had a huge effect in countries like Vietnam, for example. And so people there have had to just eat less meat, but they want meat. And as their incomes increase in countries in Southeast Asia, there are opportunities to export more pork to them as well. And not only pork, but also beef to countries like China, Indonesia, and Malaysia, and poultry as well to these countries. So this still continues to be and will be into the future a good, strong export opportunity for U.S. pork and poultry, and that is really important to North Carolina. Well, we can't miss this one, can we, Commissioner? You talked about this, and this is huge. We had dropped down to about 238 million pounds of flue-cured production in the United States, and most of that, of course, is produced here in North Carolina. But with China returning and purchasing U.S. tobacco again, we're going to see contracted pounds return to over 300 million pounds in 2021. So that's very good news for North Carolina since we produce most of that flue-cured tobacco. And as the Commissioner mentioned, this is not only China, but other buyers as well, increasing their purchases for 2021. Now, one of the things going forward is phase one laid out some huge trade goals that China was to meet. They're probably not going to meet those phase one targets. And so what we're wondering now is, how will the Biden administration approach trade, in particular in the short run with China? And Biden has not moved really quickly on trade. He's had other priorities in place. And so we're kind of waiting to see, how that trade policy will come up. One of the comments from the Council on Foreign Relations last month said that President Trump disrupted U.S. trade policy in the name of better deals. President-elect Biden proposes a combination of domestic investment and better coordination with allies. So one of the things a lot of people think is that his tactics, like with the European Union, are going to change. He's going to try to build strong alliances to confront some of the problems that we see with China. So not a huge amount of trade action thus far with Biden. He hasn't even appointed all the top trade officials with USTR, but that'll probably happen pretty soon. One of the things that has affected us in late 2020 and early 2021 was the imposition of tariffs of 25% by the European Union on tobacco, sweet potatoes, and peanuts, three commodities that are very, very important in North Carolina. Now, this had nothing to do with a dispute over agriculture. It had to do with a long-running dispute over airline subsidies between both the EU and the US. I think once trade officials are put in place, that you'll probably see resolution at least of the 25% tariffs fairly quickly. I don't know about the overall dispute, but the EU ambassador to the US has proposed that they suspend the 25% tariffs for 6 months so they can try to renegotiate this deal or negotiate an end to the dispute. So hopefully this will come off a little later this year. It's been problematic because it's introduced a barrier in the short run, and it's caused exporters to have to try to figure out how they're going to deal with this. And it's caused buyers in the EU how they're going to have to figure that. Do they just wait for this tariff to be removed to make their purchases? Do they make them somewhere else? So it's been a problem, but hopefully it'll be resolved sometime later this year. One of the interesting things I think when we think about trade policy is the Biden administration has said that they want foreign policy for the middle class. And I don't know exactly what that means, but I think in terms of trade deals, a lot of the experts think you're going to see labor requirements at part of these trade deals, and also environmental concerns, particularly climate change, is part of this. Okay, let's talk about labor a minute with regard to that. Very important, and we're probably going to see some big changes in this area. First of all, what about H-2A? Well, the H-2A rate for North Carolina has been set for 2021. It's $13.15. That's up, I think it was $12.67 if I remember correctly, for 2020. We had some rule changes that were proposed and we're in the process of changing that would have alleviated some of the expense of dealing with H-2A. Those are not going to happen. We're going to continue with the rules we have, at least for right now, and the AWR is going to, increase like it normally does. The question in a lot of folks' mind is there going to be an increase in the federal minimum wage? Biden administration has proposed that an increase to $15 over a period of years, I think by 2030. I don't know whether that will pass or whether that will be what will happen. There's a lot of people on that side of the aisle that have reservations about it. So I don't know, but it's certainly possible that we would see some kind of federal minimum wage increase. And of course, if that happens, we're going to see the adverse effect wage rate for H-2A go up. Well, but that's not the only thing we have to be concerned about with labor, because, we're going to see probably some pretty big changes in immigration policy. I don't know exactly what will happen. This is all politics, but the Biden administration has proposed an 8-year path to citizenship for undocumented immigrants. They proposed a shorter path to citizenship for dreamers and agricultural workers and a fairly short path for green cards for ag workers. I don't know, that could be included in this big relief bill that's going forward. Whether that will survive or not, I don't know, but it very well could. The real question in agriculture, though, I think, is with a change in the priorities on immigration enforcement, are we going to go back to seeing a more porous border with Mexico? It seems quite possible that that will be the case. We could have an influx of foreign workers. Does that mean that we're going to see a return to use of undocumented workers, not only in agriculture, but other industries as well? California, that was their main source until we had stricter enforcement of immigration policy when they were forced to use more H-2A workers. They're not real keen on H-2A in California, so they would probably be glad to return to using other workers as well. So This may change the use this may change labor use in agriculture more than changes in the H-2A program, frankly. So we're just going to have to wait and see what happens here. There'll be a lot of uncertainty around this year, but this is a big issue for North Carolina because of the use of H-2A in tobacco and sweet potatoes and fresh produce, and particularly in the Southeast in terms of fresh produce. So we'll have to watch this closely to see how this progresses. Okay, the commissioner mentioned climate change. Well, I think that's the new byword for foreign policy. Here was a headline from CNBC just, I think, last week. It says Biden's climate change strategy looks to pay farmers to curb the carbon footprint. We remember a lot about carbon sequestration being talked about in the late 90s and the early 2000s. Well, it's back. Everybody's talking about it again. Some of you may have seen Bill Gates' plan for combating climate change, and that includes carbon sequestration on farms. But this is just being talked about by everyone. And what really prompted my attention was I was on a national conference video conference a couple of weeks ago, and a recently appointed high USDA official who had just been recently appointed by the current administration, he made the comment that if farmers wanted incentive payments for carbon sequestration rather than being regulated, they needed to be engaged in the policy process. Wow, what an eye-opener. So very important to be engaged in this policy process about carbon sequestration, because the worst case scenario was for it to be regulated into place for farmers and cost imposed without any compensation. And there are a lot of efforts along these lines. This is just one example, the Food and Agricultural Climate Alliance. I just would commend the American Farm Bureau Federation for spearheading this effort. Some unlikely partners here. Look at that, the Environmental Defense Fund. But frankly, if farmers want to receive some incentive payments rather than regulation that would be costly, this is the kind of coalitions we're going to have to see made. And it's good to see ag organizations being very proactive on this, since it's such a frontline issue right now. Well, there's also a growing private market for carbon credits. I mentioned Bill Gates. The reporter in a 60 Minutes interview mentioned to him, said, "You have a huge carbon footprint. How do you justify that, when you're so big on climate change?" And he said, "Well, I buy carbon credits. I spend about $7 million a year buying carbon credits to offset my footprint." And a lot of companies are doing this now. They're basically in their social responsibility plans, excuse me, they're including buying carbon offsets. So we're seeing a growing private market here, and with government initiatives in the EU and the US, this is just going to be something that's going to be a frontline issue coming up, and will change foreign policy. I think we'll see USDA policy change towards something like being incentive payments for carbon credits. So important to be engaged here, and we'll just see how it turns out. Let me lastly talk about the pandemic. It had big effects here in North Carolina. It had big effects in agriculture. This is a graph from Euromonitor International looking at global e-commerce sales of food, fresh food, and this means produce and meat and seafood. And just look how it grew in 2020. It had been growing, but we saw explosive growth in e-commerce retail sales of food in 2020 in key markets like the US, Brazil, Australia, the European Union. So this was a trend that was happening, and a trend that has been further promoted by the pandemic. Well, here in North Carolina, and the US, we've also seen that the pandemic promoted sales of local food. This is a graph. The yellow or orange bars are 2019 sales in the local food hub up in my neck of the woods, the High Country Food Hub in Watauga County. And the green bars are 2020 sales by this local food hub. Look how they jumped when the pandemic hit back in March. This is for the 52 weeks in 2020. And you can see that they remained really strong. So while local food is not a huge percentage of our farm sales receipts in North Carolina, it is a growing and important percentage that affects a lot of smaller farmers in particular. The question going forward is, can local food hang on to this market share that they gained because of the pandemic? And I think in many cases they'll be able to, but of course they're going to have to work to maintain that market share as the pandemic eases off. Well, they were not the only product that benefited. Peanut use is another good example of a beneficiary of the pandemic. Now, we sell a lot of in-shell peanuts out of North Carolina because we grow Virginia type peanuts, and in-shell use probably for this coming year is going to be down a little bit for this crop year 2020, 2021. But peanut butter use has really gone up during the pandemic. And this just shows you the crop year that ended last August as relative to the crop year that ended in August of 19. And you can see that peanut butter use was up very substantially. But peanut butter use has been up all kinds of peanuts. So this has been a beneficiary of the pandemic. I don't know how much of that's going to hang on as we get away from the pandemic. We're going to probably lose some of that, but of course, we're going to see our in-shell use come back as well. Well, meat and poultry, as we mentioned, have been affected dramatically by the pandemic. And if you look at global meat markets, you'll see a drop due to the pandemic in a lot of, especially developing country markets. But that drop in Asia Pacific, frankly, that was mostly African swine fever. It was partly the pandemic, but it was more attributed to African swine fever. And so as this region recovers, they're either going to import more meat, as we talked about for much of the Asia Pacific and China in the short run, or they're going to try to recover in their own meat industries. But I think there are real export opportunities in this area as they recover both from African swine fever and from the pandemic. And, you know, hopefully, particularly a state like North Carolina can grasp onto that, and we can ship more pork and poultry to this area. Well, let me just go over a few takeaways. We've talked about a lot of things today. There's just a ton of things going on this year. A lot of it's positive, so I think we will have a better year in agriculture for a number of reasons I mentioned. But let's just run over these really quick as we leave. With regard to farm income, definitely going to see stronger commodity markets. We will see lower government payments because of just the changing situation. And USDA forecast a decrease in U.S. farm income. Frankly, I think here in North Carolina, we might see an increase this year when the numbers come out because of how we were impacted by both the pandemic and the trade war. Trade, well, continued strong export opportunities in 2021 for pork, poultry, soybeans, and corn. And I can add tobacco to that as well. We'll see flue-cured tobacco production rebound to over 300 million pounds, which is really good news. I think in the short run, there are very strong opportunities with China because of both African swine fever and perhaps some resolution of the trade issues. But the future with China is clouded by the strained relations that I mentioned earlier. So we're just going to have to see how that goes into the future. I think there are strong opportunities, as I mentioned, with other Southeast Asia countries as well as other countries around the world. And I'm pretty optimistic we're going to see resolution of this, at least the tariffs relaxed from this airline dispute that has impacted North Carolina with tobacco, sweet potato, and peanuts. Hopefully those tariffs will come off sometime later this year. Labor, going to be a lot of things going on there. Yes, we could see an increase in the federal minimum wage, which would cause the AWR to go up even more than it's gone up for 2021. Like I mentioned, it's $13.15 for North Carolina in 2021. But the immigration policy changes that may come about in the next year or two may have a bigger effect on labor availability and labor use in U.S. agriculture than impacts on H-2A. So we're just going to have to wait and see how that affects us. Unfortunately, it does introduce quite a bit of uncertainty. Fortunately, I guess the H-2A program, although expensive, is still available at its current form for us and will be very relevant for for North Carolina agriculture in 2021. Climate change, I think it's the new theme for farm programs. And I think you very well will see incentive payments for carbon sequestration included in USDA farm program payments. So as I mentioned, it's very important that the farm community be engaged here so that agriculture doesn't get rolled over. recovery from the pandemic. I hope this is a year of recovery. I hope it's a year when we transition to back something about normal. So what's it going to look like when we transition back? Some things are forever changed. I mean, what food purchase practices do we return to? Well, I think we'll return to eating out. I think everybody's ready to be able to eat out again. But what practices do we retain from the pandemic? Online grocery purchases were growing anyway, and the pandemic just accelerated that. I think that's here to stay. We've seen an acceleration in that trend. A big question for local food is: are there ways for them to hold on to the gains in market share that they had from the pandemic? And so, local food folks and farmers and entities working in this area are going to have to work hard to try to hold on to that. I think that there's going to be continued growth in global meat consumption. That's going to resume after pretty devastating effects in Southeast Asia from African swine fever, but also effects globally from the pandemic. Well, that sort of wraps up my comments, folks. As you can see, it's going to be a really active year with lots of stuff going on. But yes, Commissioner, I think that, in general, this is going to be a better year than we've had in the past, especially for North Carolina. So with that, I will stop and put it back to you. And thank you so much for letting me be with you virtually. Hope we'll get together to be in person next year. So.
Blake, thank you so much for that presentation. And I echo your sentiments. And of course, my optimism may overtake your figures before it's over with. I hope so.
That'd be great. I like that scenario too, Commissioner.
I think the next part of this, President Harding, we're going to move into a question and answer period.
Yes, thank you, Commissioner. My name is Jamie Thomas. I am with the communications team at North Carolina Farm Bureau. We're going to open it up for questions, as he said. We'd like for you to please submit your question for the panelists in the Q&A box. Please say your name and who you were with, your organization or your media group, and then we will ask it away. And starting with that, we've already got a few that we already have coming in. And this first one is for you, Commissioner, from Christy Harper with WLOS. She says, what percentage of the $20 million in CARES Act money came to Western North Carolina?
This program was actually a statewide program, and it was a grant program. And it was divided up legislatively. Of the $20 million, $15 million went to protein processors across North Carolina, and $5 million went to our fish processors. So I believe that we were able to fulfill all qualified grant requests that came in to us on both sides. And if I were to have to make a guess, I would guess maybe about a third of it went to Western North Carolina. And there was much more to the program than just the $20 million. We were able to grant $750,000 to small and medium-sized farmers markets all across the state. And I know a lot of money went to the West in that program. We were able to spend about $2 million helping dairy farmers that have had problems during the pandemic. If you remember, they were actually dumping milk at a time that there was no milk in the grocery store. So it was more wide-ranging, even to the point that we passed through money to all of the food banks in North Carolina. And I think that totaled up to some $12 million. So this CARES money was spread around all over North Carolina, and we were proud to be able to get this money out in a timely fashion. And I can tell you that we will be seeking additional monies for a program like this that will include value-added processors of protein in North Carolina. So hopefully we're not through yet.
Christy also asked, what percentage of North Carolina's agriculture business goes to the foreign exports, which I will give to Dr. Brown.
Thank you. And I'm trying to remember the exact percentages, but I believe if you count everything, it's probably over 50%. I know it is in particular for commodities like tobacco, where we export about 60% of those pounds.
And if I could add to that, it varies commodity by commodity. We are very dependent on export markets, and tobacco, probably as much as 65, 70% of the tobacco is exported. And sweet potatoes, I think the figure is around 40% of our sweet potato crop is exported. So it varies from commodity to commodity.
Thank you. William Kelly asked, when will vaccines be widely available for farm workers? Sorry, when will vaccines be widely available for farm workers? Does anyone want to chime in?
I would love to answer that question with an affirmative date, but it's like everything else in the vaccine world. It depends on availability of vaccine. President Harding and I have advocated to public health that our critical infrastructure workers, including H-2A workers, need to be vaccinated immediately. They're beginning to arrive in North Carolina right now, and we want to get ahead of the curve instead of behind it. So it depends on public health's priorities and vaccine availability.
Great job, Commissioner. I wouldn't add anything to that, but I would add that, when we talk about farm workers, that's all of agriculture. So we need to vaccinate our farmers, our farm families that are working on the farm beside their workers. And I know we both agreed on that and working towards that, but hopefully soon.
Yeah, and what I hope happens when this vaccine becomes available to critical infrastructure workers, which would include the farmers, I hope the farmer and his family are standing at the front of the line and set an example for the workers that the vaccine is safe, it is beneficial for the workers to be able to take this vaccine, and we certainly hope that they do. We're going to be partnering with NC State University and A&T State University and their extension service to get educational material out to the workers so that they understand the necessity of taking this vaccine.
Hopefully this will be a fun one. Commissioner Troxler, the state fair is on. What about the Mountain State Fair? Is it also on?
I'm having trouble hearing.
If the state fair is a go, is the Mountain State Fair also a go this year?
We are moving ahead with plans for the Mountain State Fair. So everybody be prepared. We're going to have a very, very big fair year. And we've been lucky enough to be able to move some money around to help the Mountain State Fair and the State Fair, but we're hopeful the legislature will help us out some more. And just to put it in perspective, the State Fair has lost about $9.2 million in revenue this past year because of cancellation of events, including the State Fair. So we need a really good state fair to get back on sound financial footing. And the same goes for the Mountain State Fair. It's been a long dry spell for both fairs, and we need to be successful this year. So come out to the fairs.
Erica Peterson with the North Carolina Agribusiness Council asks Commissioner Troxler, what are your thoughts about the proposed federal minimum wage increase? There's an increase proposed of $10 or $15 an hour, and how that will impact growers.
Well, what we know is that if there is a minimum wage increase at the farm level or a change in regulation at the farm level, it increased production costs. So the one thing that would have to happen if we're going to stay in business in agriculture, that means that the price of the products that we produce is going to have to go up. And that means that the public will be paying more for agricultural products. And when you start doing things like this, it also can increase the inflation rate, in my opinion, and that's just what I think.
Commissioner, Representative John Ager says, regarding meat processing, Western North Carolina has become something of a desert. Will you support an effort to bring a public or private project to build a plant in Western North Carolina? Did you hear that?
The echo is not good.
From Representative John Ager,
he said that part.
Okay, regarding meat processing in the western part of the state, it's almost become something of a desert. So do you support an effort to bring a public or private project to build a plant in Western North Carolina?
I certainly do. And of course, the public-private partnership means that there's going to have to be public funds available to be able to do this. But we've actually, my folks have actually been in meetings with people in Western North Carolina about this very issue. And we realize that we've got a lot of cattle, particularly in Western North Carolina. And there is a need out there for processing, and we certainly hope that it does happen. So I'm very, very supportive.
Nick Wood is the policy director for Carolina Farm Stewardship Association and asks, what are some opportunities that you see at the state level to help our local farms and food sector in holding on to what it accomplished amidst the pandemic and the continuing to strengthen the role in strengthening local economies as part of our recovery?
And I think what I heard is about small farms.
Yeah, how can we help our local farms in holding on to what they've gained during the pandemic?
Well, you know, I think that some of the programs that we put out there have certainly been of great benefit, especially the farmers market money that we were able to grant out, some $750,000. That's a vital market for our farmers, especially locally, and we hope that's been a big help. But continuing I think the gains we've made in local foods during the pandemic, we hope that the food process, the slaughter facility money that we put out does facilitate more protein being available directly from the farm to the people that want to consume local products. And it all comes down to marketing too. Our marketing division has one of the strongest local food branding programs in the nation, got to be NC. And we're going to continue to push our local products. And I do see a real opportunity for younger farmers, limited resource farmers, to be able to take small acreages and a smaller investment and be able to access the local market and be entrepreneurs. And I know I myself have been through that, starting with a small produce operation and being able to grow that into something that was pretty successful over time. So I think the opportunity is there. We're working with commodity organizations with our specialty block grant funds that come from USDA. So those are some of the things that we've got ongoing right now.
I'll ask this question to President Harding. What do you see as the top federal issues that are going to have an impact on agriculture?
Well, I think Blake Brown covered that very well in his presentation, that I think we all know climate change is going to be one of the top federal issues, environmental issues. As he talked about, it's a new direction, but it's not new to farmers. And I appreciate what Commissioner Troxler said in his message, that, you know, we're the original environmentalists, and we're the answer to this climate change problem. And I think we need to tell that story, whether it's planting trees or planting crops or open space or whatever. And so that's where we're going to be at North Carolina Farm Bureau at the table. As Blake mentioned, we're proud of American Farm Bureau's cooperation with EDF and other folks, and we're going to work together to answer this problem. And that's what we've done in the past, and that's what we'll continue to do. Obviously, labor. We've talked about labor forever, and I think that will continue to be a top federal issue as we look at immigration, perhaps policy changes. And it's a huge topic for us here in North Carolina with everything that we do here. So I think those two, that's plenty of work right there, those two.
Thank you. Commissioner, what can people who support agriculture do to help the industry?
I think the people that support agriculture can really be helpful if they will help us get this message out there about what agriculture is, that we are the original environmentalists, that we have got to look after the environment to be able to be successful, and to talk about the successes of agriculture in terms of productivity. There's no other agricultural system in the world that is productive as we are, and it's proven by the efficiency that we raise the food and the price that we pay for food in the United States. So we have all got to come together in a big educational campaign to make sure that the public understands that we are the good guys in this. We feed you every day, and we're going to do our very best to make sure that that the environment is protected.
All right, Commissioner, we've kind of touched on this, but talk about what you see as a main positive for agriculture that came from the COVID pandemic.
I think the versatility that we saw in agriculture is something that's going to carry forward. We had this huge adjustment when the restaurants closed, the universities closed, the schools closed. All the institutional food went away, that demand for institutional food. So it all went to the grocery store. And that was not an easy thing to do, but we adjusted over time to that. We learned at the farm level how to market products in a different way. And we learned that that we got to be even more efficient at what we do if we're going to make it through times like this. And all of this is going to carry forward into success.
All right, this next question I'll direct first to Dr. Brown from Representative Ager again. Where do we go with hemp?
Well, hemp is something that we have talked about now for a couple of years. We know that we're successful at growing hemp in North Carolina. It fits in very well with the skill set and the infrastructure that we have. The problem is the production got way out front of the market. And we saw atrocities in manufacturing of some of the hemp products. I think the first step, and we'll be proposing something about this, is to have a system whereby the Department of Ag can certify the production practices of people that are, say, going to produce CBD oil so that the public can be confident that these products are produced under good manufacturing principles, much like you would see in nutritional supplements. So developing that market before we overplant is the key to it. The federal USDA has come up with proposed rules on how they will regulate hemp production, and quite frankly, they still would make it almost impossible for us in North Carolina to be able to run a successful hemp program at the state level. So we've got to have that discussion. Will it be the state running a program, or will the feds run the program? And we look after the marketing of it and the things that are going to help drive it forward. And that's the discussion that we will have with the legislature as time goes on.
Dr. Brown, would you like to add anything to that?
Yeah, no, I would just agree with the commissioner. I think North Carolina is very well positioned to be a major player in this industry. I mean, it's a new industry. One of the things that has to happen is, to have the final products more well defined. There's going to be a lot of chaos and turmoil, as we've seen in that process. But ultimately, frankly, I think the tobacco industry is very well positioned to be a major player here, because tobacco farmers know how to deal with products like this. Tobacco companies know how to deal with products that are highly regulated, and also in the retail space. And then, it's going to be interesting to see how some of this shakes out with the pharmaceutical industry. But I think in general, North Carolina is very well positioned to be a low-cost player and a major player in this as we see some of these things settle out.
If I could add one more thing, at the state level in North Carolina and at the state level in many other states across the country, what we've been wanting and needing is a regulatory structure nationally out of FDA that does not exist today. Until we have a level playing field state to state, it's going to make it awfully difficult to develop the markets like they need to be developed.
And I would just add to that, Commissioner, I think you hit the nail on the head. If a lot of how this shakes out will be defined by how and when FDA regulates the hemp trade. And so as we see that develop and go forward, that's, in my opinion, probably going to favor industries like the tobacco industry in North Carolina in being able to compete successfully in this. So.
This question is for the commissioner and Dr. Blake. It's from Ben Massa. He's the Senior Director of North Carolina Ports. Regarding sweet potato exports, what countries in the Middle East are we targeting?
What areas are we targeting?
What countries in the Middle East are we targeting?
You know, that's something that I'm not right off the top of my head that I could answer that. But what I can tell you, any and all of them that want sweet potatoes will be there.
Dr. Brown?
Yeah, I've heard Peter Thornton talk about this, who works for the commissioner, and I know that they are targeting some countries in the Middle East. You know, sweet potato producers have a wonderful product. There's exploding demand here in the U.S., exploding demand in the European Union. I think what they have to be on guard are, you know, for other countries that try to replicate what they're producing here, in particular like Spain. That's not happened yet, but I know those countries are trying very hard to do that. So that just emphasizes the importance of our ports, the importance of working with the EU and other countries on their import restrictions or any kind of barriers that might exist for products like sweet potatoes, because it's been a great product for us, and our producers, with the help of NCDA and others, have just done a terrific job getting into those markets, and we want to make sure they remain competitive.
You know, it's not as easy as you might think to go to some place in the world that has not had sweet potatoes and sell a sweet potato. I have participated in several international marketing trips where we were actually introducing people to sweet potatoes. So it's taste preference. And you've got to start out by going over and demonstrating dishes with sweet potatoes. I know in Germany, we went into grocery stores and they were actually frying sweet potatoes in the grocery store. So it's first developed the taste preference, then there's the distribution that's got to come about. So it takes a little time.
And I would just add, I think it's really important to continue to try to work on export markets, but don't let us take our focus off the U.S. market too, because we have a clear advantage in the U.S. market because we don't have to ship sweet potatoes washed, you know, in a container across the ocean. And the U.S. market, anytime you do a search on Google for the top 10 health foods, most of the time sweet potato is going to come up as one of those. So it's just a real opportunity here at home as well. So we don't want to miss out on that any at all either. So.
And we are going to enter in with the Sweet Potato Commission into a branding program that has been authorized in legislation. And, you know, if you think about Idaho potatoes, we want the whole world to know sweet potato is North Carolina, and that's the branding program that we'll try to put out there.
This question comes from Randolph County Commissioner David Allen. He'd like to know, how can we better match local producers to local needs in regards to food banks, food pantries, as well as local restaurants?
That's a good question. In some cases, the food has got to be grown in a particular way, and it gets difficult when you get into food distribution of these products at the local level. I know we had a complaint recently about some food bank products that had a China label on them. Well, we're pretty sure that those weren't USDA products, but if somebody donates a product to the food bank, no matter where it comes from, you know, they're probably going to accept it. And I don't know how we develop a program for local people to really get into the food distribution. And I don't have my assistant commissioner here that is over that. So that's about the best answer that I can give you. It's got to be grown in a particular way if it's going to be distributed to the public.
Could I add to that?
Absolutely.
I think it's really important for local food. As I look around the state and I see efforts that were very successful and some that weren't so much, a lot of that needs to occur at the local area. You know, I mentioned the High Country Food Hub in my presentation and how they'd increased. They have been very successful, very aggressive, very proactive at the local level in engaging with the consumers there in that area. And it depends on what kind of consumers you have. You know, some areas are more receptive than others, but I think what local governments can do is build coalitions of farmers and consumers and advocates for this, where they can really promote it at that local county level. And that would include working with folks at NCDA and others on farmers markets, you know, being proactive in trying to increase the availability of meat processing opportunities. But a lot of that, the success is determined by how you focus at the local county level.
Thank you. President Harding.
Yes.
I know that this is a very big issue for Farm Bureau is broadband. Where are we as far as that goes with our rural communities, and why is it so important that farmers have access to high-speed internet?
Well, we've all learned the importance of high-speed internet. We've been saying that for years in agriculture, that it's important for farmers. As Commissioner mentioned, farming is high tech. It's high tech today, and so we need that technology on the farm. Now we've got partners all over the state who say, yes, we need rural broadband. And so we've seen a lot of movement in that this past year, whether it's federal funding or state funding, which is absolutely great. You know, what I've told our people is, I'm ready to see boots on the ground. Let's get this done. Yep. Let's get this done. So I think we're working on that. We're working here at Farm Bureau. We're actually going to do a broadband Zoom here in the next week or two to talk about how local communities, and so it's very similar to what Dr. Brown was just talking about with local food. Local communities partnering together can be successful in bringing that funds, that money that needs to happen to help broadband be there. So I think it's probably the one issue that we can all agree on, and let's get it done.
Absolutely, it is time for action. I just saw a recent survey that surprised me, but farmers across North Carolina, there were about 60% of them that said that the broadband access that they had was either very slow or non-existent. Well, with technology today in agriculture, the reliability and speed of that broadband is paramount. So we have got to get out here and get this job done. And it's not as easy as it sounds, and it is expensive. I traveled with Secretary Sonny Perdue this summer up to Madison County to make an award for broadband up there. And we just got word back that said that they were beginning to hook customers up the furthest away from the city where it originates. And everybody said that doesn't make sense, but if you go to Madison County, it probably does, because it was very difficult to get to the end of the line to begin with. And instead of coming back and starting over again, I guess they just turned around and they're grabbing the cable and pulling themselves back because it's that rough up there.
We've talked about H2A and the importance of those workers to our farmers. I posed this question to both Commissioner and President Harding. The adverse effect wage rate, it's rising. We know that it's now $13.15 an hour. What is being done to address this?
Well, you know, I thought the Commissioner's comments earlier really helped explain it a little bit, that people need to understand that when you raise the wage rate, you raise the cost of goods, and it's going to happen. Unfortunately, on the farm, many times we don't have the opportunity to set our own price. Now, this goes back to local food and some of that where we can set our own price. But if you're talking about a commodity, you don't have that opportunity to set your own price. And so the squeeze there becomes on the farmer if he has to pay more to produce the product and gets less. So that's the economics of it that I think is important people understand. It's not about not wanting to pay someone. It's about the economics of it. So I think that's what I would say, Commissioner.
Yeah, and it's a federal issue. And we have worked for over 20 years on the H2A program on reforms. We thought that the wage rate was going to be frozen this year. As it turned out, that was not the truth. So it's been a long-term problem, one we're going to continue to work on. But with H2A in particular, the wage rate is just the beginning of the cost of that labor that involves housing and fees. And I've had farmers tell me that they've got over $18 an hour invested in these workers now.
Thank you. It looks like we are out of questions. I'd like to thank everyone for their participation. Commissioner Troxler, I will hand things back over to you so you can wrap this up.
Well, I certainly have enjoyed this discussion today and wish we had more time. And I thank once again President Harding and Farm Bureau for hosting this and making this available to us. And once we get through the pandemic, we will go back to having a live forum. And I look forward to seeing all of you face to face and shaking hands and hugging folks again. This has been a pretty awful experience for somebody that really does enjoy being with people. Thank you.